Good morning and welcome to Student-Driven Playlists. We're going to talk about putting learning into the hands of your students. My name is Brenda Gillis. I'm one of the Tech and Innovation coaches, and I also have Amy Fosa here with me this morning. So thank you so much for joining us today. Just so that you are aware of some logistics, this training is scheduled for 1 hour. We anticipate the webinar time taking about 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions at the end, or if you want to spend that time kind of working on the concepts that we are sharing with you this morning, that's wonderful. That's how we get to that hour's worth of time. And then if you have any questions during the session, please use the chat feature, and Amy and I will be sharing both the hosting and the answering of questions in the chat or addressing them with you guys online. We are recording this, so please keep that in mind. We love seeing your faces on the camera, so we encourage you to keep those on, but we do want to let you know that it is being recorded. And the recording will be made available in the professional development catalog link within the next 48 hours. We'll update that for you, just in case you want to watch this again. Also, we have additional resources that can be found on our YouTube channel or on the website, powausd.com/PUSD Innovate. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. In order to access this slide deck, we do have a bit.ly link there at the bottom for you. It's bit.ly/student-driven-PD. So if you want to join us, we do have some resources linked in the slide deck for you if you want to go ahead and open that up or make a copy of it. All right. So our agenda this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about the why behind student-driven playlists. We're going to review a continuum of kind of ways to look at your classroom from the lens of a teacher-led instruction to student-driven classrooms. Thinking about how we can better understand our learners and use that information to help really engage them in the learning and empower them to really take charge of their learning. We're going to talk about some different pathways to get to that student autonomy, and then review some formats for providing that student voice and choice. Okay, so the anticipated outcomes for this session are to help you understand pathways to providing voice and choice through the use of playlists in your classroom. And then we'll also spend some time exploring student-driven playlist templates so that you have something to walk away with and a place to get started. Okay. When we think about our why, we have a quote here for you, thinking about the difference between engagement and empowerment, and thinking about how you can really empower your students to really know themselves as learners and advocate for what they can do for themselves to get the most out of their education and that learning experience. So a couple of the pieces that we're going to be taking a look at are the voice and choice, how students can express and also choose to what they're doing, their activities, or how they're accessing information in order to take more ownership over their learning. Thinking about small group instruction, how you can really leverage your time when your students are engaged in independent work to have that small group and one-on-one focus time to really impact your students. And then how we can personalize the educational experience for our students to use data in meaningful ways to inform and personalize our instruction. The next piece we have for you, kind of this background as we move forward through this getting to those more student-driven playlists, is thinking about our teaching along a continuum. And the reason we talk about it as a continuum is because we know that there are some situations in the classroom that are going to lend themselves more to a teacher-led aspect. And then what we're looking at and exploring more today is how we can find more opportunities for that student-driven piece. So this is something that is kind of fluid, and we know that throughout the day and throughout the school year, you're going to move between and kind of have not necessarily one or the other. but somewhere in between or on one end of this continuum that we can consistently move throughout. So a teacher-led classroom is where the teacher's really teaching more to the middle of the class, using summative assessment plans. And then you can read through these other pieces here. It's really that the learner is taking a more passive role than they are when we look at this in comparison to a more student-driven classroom, in which the teacher and the learner are working together to co-design learning, to get input back from the students on where their strengths and interests lie, on what learning styles best fit them for that particular concept, and really giving a space for that to be a more collaborative journey together towards that more student-driven type of classroom. Okay, so the first step in this is really getting to know your students, thinking about their different learning styles. What are their academic goals? We're collecting some data on our students, and we know the areas in which they're going to need additional support. What are their strengths and interests, and how can I best pull those into the classroom to really help students connect to the learning? And how can I help my students know themselves better as learners? And so we have a few resources for you here. We have resources in the district that you can access through My Plan. Thrively is one, and Thrively is one of those freemium kinds of products, but what we're talking about is the free resources within there. They offer a strengths assessment. And this really can help your students learn more about themselves and seeing the strengths that they have. So I know for me as a kid, my family considered me quite bossy, which I always thought was kind of negative. But there are some leadership skills in that. And so if you can frame those strengths and really help students see that some of their traits and their strengths are really coming from who they are, and that there are positives in those and how to channel those, it really empowers them to understand themselves better and understand how they can help other people and take advantage of their own strengths. And then Zello is a program for our 6th through 12th grade students that has a similar kind of assessment in there, a self-assessment to really help students better know themselves. And then both of those programs provide information for the teacher and data that you can pull out to really help your students on that journey of better knowing themselves, and for you to better understand them as well. And then we also there are a ton of free online resources as far as student assessments for learning styles. Can I figure out if I'm an auditory or a visual or a kinesthetic learner? And what does that mean for me in my study habits and in my school habits, and the types of projects or assignments or the types of evidence of my own learning that I might prefer to share with a teacher. And so we just have one example there for you, a quick student assessment on learning styles. And I have to say that working with a variety of students, this is probably one of the most empowering things when they really understand about themselves that, oh my gosh, like I learn better when I can move through something, or I really learn better when I can see it. And then they understand this as a study habit, in some of the upper grades, and just knowing themselves that this is a way I'm going to learn this content better if I can study it while I'm hearing it, or while I'm talking about it, or when I can actually see it, or do some kind of sketch noting to help me really remember some facts, or those kinds of things. So all of these elements really play together in helping us know our students better and helping them know themselves and be able to advocate for themselves as learners. All right, I think Amy's going to jump into some of our pathways now, unless there's anything you want to add.
Nope, that was, I think, just, adding on to what Brenda said about the importance of getting your students to know themselves as learners. A lot of this will help them when they're choosing their own grouping. So if you give them choice of, a group to work together with in terms of going through a group project. Look for others who have different strengths than you so that you can strengthen the project and you can learn from one another. Also, if you are making the groups, using some of those resources that we've had can help you in designing your grouping, right? If you have students who are all visual learners, you may or may not, depending on the project, want them all together. Or if you have a group of students who is very verbal, are you going to want them all in one group together? So really looking at the different strengths that your students have, both in how they learn and how they tend to learn best and show their learning can really help you moving forward and when we're looking at the pathways for voice and choice. So when we start looking at the pathways for voice and choice and providing some more student autonomy within our classroom, one of the things we always encourage teachers to look at first is, what is the focus of the learning? Are you focusing more on a content standard or are you focusing more on a method standard? Because that will determine also the pathway that you can take when designing, right? If I'm looking for a content standard and I'm asking students to show me proof that you've mastered or you've learned certain content, I can usually provide you more choice with how you are showing me your learning. Where if it's a method standard, I'm probably not going to have as much choice in how they show their learning because I'm asking to show me that you've learned to do something, right? If I'm asking students to show me that they understand how to write an opinion piece, let's say, I'm probably not going to give them choices in how they show their learning because I'm going to want them all to submit a formal writing piece. So we're going to go through, again, those pathways right now for voice and choice. So we're going to talk about giving students choice in how they learn. We're going to hit on giving students choice in how they show their learning, choice in what they learn, and finally, choice in the pace that they learn. Now, initially, when you start off with adding more student autonomy, we will really encourage you to not try to do all of these things at once, right? Sometimes too much choice can be overwhelming for students. So start with one thing, and as they become more comfortable and as you become more comfortable switching that control over to the students, then add other pathways within. So the first focus area we're going to look at is the choice in how students learn. And when we are looking at that, we're giving students or offering them a choice in how they learn the content. So this is where you really want to take into consideration the auditory learners, the visual learners, the kinesthetic learners. Am I providing multiple pathways for students to learn the content? So one of the options that we have for you as a sample is a template where you give your students this choice. So you provide them with a playlist that says choose one from each column. Now this one has 6 different choices. You may not want to do that. Maybe you just say, okay, I'm going to focus on auditory and visual and kinesthetic, or maybe for this one, I'm focusing just on auditory and visual, but giving them different pathways to access that learning. So here again, how would you like to learn? Do you want to watch it? Do you want to read it? Do you want to collaborate? Experiment and tinker if that would be appropriate? Do you want to meet with the teacher or do you want to listen to it? So again, providing those options for those students. The next one is giving students choice in how they show their learning. So students are offered a choice in how they learn their content and show their learning of the content. So what that would look like is something like this. So how would you like to share your learning? So they have a rubric. Your rubric is the same, regardless of if they're showing you their learning in the slide presentation, if they're making an infographic or a newspaper magazine, the outcome is the same. Have they shown you that they have mastered certain content within this? Now, depending on your grade level, that is where you'll take into account, do I want to put on here directions, introducing them to a new tool and have them learn that tool on their own? Or do I want to walk them through and scaffold the tool? So for example, if I was teaching a second grade classroom, I'm probably going to do more scaffolding before I put a tool on here that students can use from, right? I'm going to take them through how to use the basics of Google Slides, or the basics of how to use Adobe Spark to make an infographic. Where if I was teaching a secondary class, I would probably just put a tutorial linked to the Google Slides that students could watch and access on their own because of their developmental level and what they're able to access that learning on their own. It would be more appropriate to do that. So this is where, again, you're making the choice of how much scaffolding needs to go in to the teaching of the tool, and then how many different ways do I want to provide my students to share their learning. Another thing we've seen teachers do is they're providing this, all students have the same rubric, but maybe they have a small percentage of points that are specific to the presentation. So on the podcast, let's say, were they engaging? How was the tone of voice? How was the recording? Where you're looking more at features of the tool versus the actual learning itself. So that just is up to you and your teaching preference, is if you want to add that as a component or not, or just leave it. Everyone has the same rubric, but you get to provide me with the choice in how you are showing what you know. Again, taking into account, is this a content or a method standard? Next, we're going to go into choice in what students want to learn. So students are offered choice within the standard about what they want to learn about. So I always kind of go back to my own teaching experience when I talk about this one, because for years and years, we were teaching about different types of animals and adaptations. And for some reason, we always chose penguins. That was our thing for the year. That was our theme. That was the one we hit. So everyone through our team, we taught about penguins.
Raise your hand if you remember the penguin unit.
Yes, maybe some of you may remember the penguin unit if you were primary. And then we got to the point where we started looking at it and saying, why did we choose this? Like, this was our choice. This was very a teacher-centered choice where we said, here's the animal we are going to learn about. So as we started to shift even more to that student-led classroom, we said, okay, we're still going to hold them accountable for learning the same thing about adaptations, but we're going to let them choose. We're going to give them choice in the animal that they are going to be learning about. So that's the first sample we're kind of going to show you. Is the standard is the same. We're just giving the students choice in the animal or adaptation that they're learning about. So this one is actually a habitat one. So we took the standard and we said, okay, here's our standard, and they need to show that they have the content knowledge around a particular habitat and how organisms can survive well, and some survive less well, and some cannot survive at all. So rather than us choosing, okay, all students are going to learn about rainforests, that's our habitat we're going to focus on, we're going to put some of that control into the students' hands, and they're going to lead their learning and decide, do I want to learn about the ocean, the rainforest, the desert, and then how am I going to go ahead and show that learning?
I'm sorry. We had a request for the bit.ly and I don't have it written in front of me. I apologize. Okay. Do you have it somewhere that I can just?
Yeah. So just as a quick reminder, the bit.ly that you will go to is bit.ly/student-driven PD.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the one that we just focused on was very primary. So now we're going to look at a secondary example. So how would I give my students choice in what they want to learn using a secondary example? So when we look at that, we're going to be looking at this standard, thank you, which is inheritance and variation of traits. So for this one, students, the standard itself is asking questions to clarify relationships about the role of DNA and chromosomes encoding. So we're looking at traits passed from parent to offspring. So specifically, we're going to look at inheritable genetic variations, right? So instead of focusing on just one type of genetic combination, we're going to give students a choice and say, okay, would you rather focus on Tay-Sachs, cystic fibrosis, or Fragile X syndrome? And there are obviously a lot more that students could choose from, but again, we're just using this specific example. So here's how you take your standard and maybe something where you had focused on just one specific topic, you're opening that topic up so students still have choice in that, now have choice in that topic, still learning the same content, going through the same thing, but applying it in a different way. And the next thing we're going to get into is the choice in the pace at which students learn. So students are offered flexibility in the pacing in which they learn the content. So this one is a little bit where you may hear, well, that means that students don't have a due date. No, you still have a due date for the assignment. They're just given choice more in the pacing that they complete the assignment. So we have some examples here that we will walk through and look more closely with the templates. So if we look at these playlists, one of them that we have on here is a DOK playlist. And when we look at the pacing of this, so the end result, let's say, is they have a certain amount of points that are due at the end of the week that they need to have completed, where each point is tied to a specific assignment. It's due for everyone on, let's say, in the 2-week period, but they get to choose the combination of these different assignments. Do I want to choose assignments that are worth more points to get to my 15 points? Or do I want to choose smaller assignments? So right now on this one, they must complete at least one activity from every row and every column. So that is the sandbox that they have to work with. Now, these assignments are based on DOK levels. So I know that they're still getting and they're still having to apply information at each one of these DOK levels, but they're getting choice at the pace that they wish to complete that. So do I want to choose the, let's say, the DOK 4 PBL activity, which is going to take a substantial amount of time, or would I want to choose smaller activities and maybe a DOK 3 level there? So again, giving students the opportunity to have that choice in the pace at which they are learning. You can also see, if we look at the mild, medium, and spicy playlist. Sorry, we're having the lighting just went off. Apparently we're not moving enough over here. If I look at this playlist, you can see where I have mild, medium, and spicy. So the students just got finished, let's say, going through either a flipped lesson, a direct instruction, or listening to a lesson. And now I'm going to let them go on to the next part of the assignment. So I'm going to give them a choice. Are you going to choose the mild choice, which says, you know, I'm getting there, but I still need some review? Am I going to choose the medium, which is, I think I've got it and I'm ready to go on? Or the spicy, which is, I'm ready for a challenge. So a thing when you're thinking about doing these playlists where students have a lot of choice in the pacing is you're giving them an opportunity where if they need reteaching, if they're not understanding the concept, they have time to go back and acquire that knowledge. Where if they've already acquired that knowledge and they're ready to show you that they have mastery of that knowledge, they can move on. They're not kind of having to stay back and work at the pace of the other students. So some other playlists that we have on here that I'm not going to open, we'll give you some time at the end of this to kind of go through on your own, is we have what's called a D-cubed playlist, where it's discover, develop, and then demonstrate. So the discover would be, you know, a flipped instruction video, let's say. Develop would be different practice activities that they get to choose from. And then finally, a demonstration of their knowledge. So giving them options and ways that they can showcase their learning. We have a Tic Tac Toe playlist, a partner or individual playlist where they get to choose, would they want to work in a group setting or in an individual setting. And then a DOK point playlist, which is similar to the DOK playlist we went over. It's just in a different format. Now, we know there are different ways of sharing these playlists with your students. So one we wanted to make sure we showed is a playlist based on a Canvas module. So when you are building Canvas modules, you can assign prerequisites for students that must be completed before they open and move on to the next part of the module. So they have kind of that pre-work that needs to get done to show that they've mastered their learning. You can also set up the modules in a way where students have to demonstrate a certain score, and the module is set up so if, let's say, they scored below an 8 out of 10, they're going to go down one module pathway. If they've scored between an 8 and a 10, they're going to go down another module pathway, all accumulating at the end with kind of that exit ticket assessment. But within Canvas, there is, I know some of you are familiar with this, a place called Commons, where you can go and search other resources that teachers have developed and decided to share with others that you can then download and import and either edit or if you like it in its pure form, assign to your students. So this is one that is from the Canvas Commons. And if you go into Canvas Commons and you search the term leveled student mastery, path templates, or ecosystem mastery paths, some of those have already been created for you. And you can start looking through those to see if there are some, when you're looking for ways to provide more voice and choice to your students, that would fit into your classroom. This one specifically is a chemistry module that was developed by a teacher where the students have to read, watch, join, and it's more of a station rotation format, which is another option for you when you are developing playlist. So that is what we have for you that is scheduled. So again, if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. If it is, wanting to talk through developing the different playlists and how that might work in your classroom, what that would look like if you were doing the different pathways that we've gone over, please feel free to email us at edtech@powausd.com, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Brenda and I will stay on and answer any questions that you may have that are coming to you right now that you'd like to put into the chat.
So we have a question about how it works for grading in Canvas, which is a great question. There are a couple different ways to set it up, but my recommendation would be that I set it as one assignment within Canvas. And so that the playlist itself is the assignment, and then students will just have multiple submission attempts. So you're going to want to set that submission attempts or submissions up to however many. The other thing you could do is looking at your playlist, like how many pieces of evidence will students be submitting for this? And so the assignment itself, you could create with the playlist in it. And so let's say that from this playlist, that students are going to be submitting somewhere between, some may submit 3, some may submit 5, depending on if they're doing DOK point level, or if everyone's going to be submitting 4 out of it or whatever it is. So you can create the assignment, embed that playlist in the assignment itself, so in the assignment directions, and then the submissions would just vary by the student. So their submission 1 might be or they chose to do a video recording. So that would be their submission for that piece of it. Whereas another student's submission 1 might be that they've typed up some kind of essay or they've done an infographic or something like that. So the student submission types might vary, but you could create one assignment and then duplicate that assignment. And this would be evidence 1 for this playlist, evidence 2 for this playlist. And then that way you have it all in your grade book. You can track who's completed and who hasn't completed, and it's all in that one place for you. So, and then we had another question about session 2. Oh, we will be doing another session of this same presentation this afternoon. I think we're, I don't remember what time this one is. But it will be the same content this afternoon. And then this session is recorded and we'll make the recording available. I think, yeah, you can make a copy of the playlist templates from that slide. So the bit.ly student-driven PD is what will get you onto the slide deck. And then you can make copies of any of the templates that you would like. As far as keeping playlist types consistent, I would say when you're starting to introduce this to students, again, as Amy was mentioning, thinking about developmental level and grade level and your students' capacity and how much scaffolding you're going to do. For example, in the elementary grades, I would introduce one type of submission type at a time. I would walk through clarifying what are the expectations for this type of submittal, so that kids really have an understanding of how to be successful with it. What is the criteria that makes a video submission that you have to include in order to meet the criteria for a video submission? What does it look like if you're designing a poster? What does it look like if you're designing an infographic? What are the pieces that have to be included? So a lot of modeling and scaffolding for students, and then gradually building up the types of assignments that they can do independently. So that's going to take some more time. As Amy mentioned, as we get into upper grades or students with more experience, you may be able to just provide them with a link to a video tutorial, whether that's one you've recorded yourself or something that maybe you found out on YouTube, or just kind of step-by-step guides. These are some common questions or troubleshooting that you might run into if this is the kind of submittal that you want to do. But again, making sure that your criteria is clear so that you don't end up with students saying, oh yeah, I've checked all these boxes, I've done all of this stuff, but it's not really meeting your expectations. So making sure that that is very clearly communicated either through a rubric or through that modeling and scaffolding, again, depending on the student level. But as far as using one playlist type like throughout an entire year, I would probably vary it. And I think you'll see as you go through the year, and again, depending on developmental level and where your students are and what information you're wanting to get, what evidence of learning and what understanding you want to have of their understanding of these different topics and concepts, is to start with kind of one so that they get the idea, that they're understanding that their choices are going to impact them and their learning and their experience, their engagement, and that you're really getting that buy-in with them. I've seen teachers start with one kind of like very basic Tic Tac Toe kind of playlist, or even just starting with, most teachers elementary wise would start with 2 choices. Then I'm going to model and scaffold and add in a 3rd choice. And as you start doing this and building it, the kids will actually come to you and ask, can I show you my learning like this? Or maybe, if you start in one subject area and then the kids will, you start in English language arts, right? And your students will come to you in math and say, oh, hey, can I make a math video, like we do for this, but I want to do it with this concept. And they'll start advocating for themselves, which is really part of moving into that more student-driven type of classroom environment. So I would potentially change it up at some point. It's going to increase engagement, add in a new element for kids. And as you get to know each other better and you're working more together, you'll start to see that the kids will start making requests. You can even put out a student survey and see what types of assignments they really enjoy doing, or what types of evidence they like providing for you, and kind of seeing what more you can find that keeps them engaged in the content. Yeah, if there's anything you see without,
I'll add it right now.
Oh, thank you. Did you get the Tic Tac Toe playlist?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Amy's fixing that Tic Tac Toe piece, and then Yeah, you can absolutely modify these. Most of these started with things that we either came up with collaborating together, or we happened to see. I know some of those DOK ideas came from a presentation that I saw a few years ago, and then we sort of modified them to meet our own needs. Absolutely, add to them, alter them. The purpose of it is to really personalize the experience for you and your students. So you want to make the playlist work for you. We want the management piece and logistics of it to work for you as a teacher, but also for you to be able to see that empowerment piece and engagement piece with your kiddos is really going to impact their learning, and provide you with that ability to have a little bit more flexibility in your schedule to meet with those students in small groups and one-on-one to further impact their learning and their school experience. I think we are, I think we've addressed all of the questions that are in the chat, but as Amy said, we will stay on here for about, I think we have about 5-10 more minutes or so. And if you want to stay on or you have more questions, we're happy to be here and answer those for you. If you get into this later and you run into anything, please feel free again to email us edtech@powayusd.com. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your summer and that you've had a chance to relax and recharge. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.